The first day at the wilderness training camp began long before the sun rose. The air felt cold enough to sting the skin, and a faint layer of mist floated across the open field where the trainees gathered. Everyone stood in a loose line, wrapped in warm jackets, breathing out clouds of white air as they waited for instructions. The camp was famous for pushing people to their limits, but not in a dangerous way. It focused on teaching real survival skills, how to use what nature gives, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to solve problems in situations where nothing goes as planned. Among the group stood a quiet human girl who didn't speak much. She wasn't the strongest or the tallest, and she didn't try to be noticed. She kept her hands in her pockets and simply looked around, taking in every detail of the forest that stretched behind the training grounds. She noticed how the tall trees swayed softly, how the ground looked slightly wet from last night's rain, and how the camp seemed older than it looked in photos. With wooden cabins that carried years of history, the instructors walked up to the group with a box full of items. They placed it on the ground and looked at the trainees one by one. Their expressions were serious but not harsh. One of them explained the first challenge of the program. Every participant had to craft a cutting tool by using materials found around the camp. They could pick broken metal pieces from the old workshop, stones from the forest floor, or anything else nature had to offer. The point wasn't to make a perfect knife. It was to test creativity, patience, and the ability to work with limited resources. The moment the instructors finished talking, the group rushed toward the workshop area. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. Rusted metal pieces were scattered around old tables. Some fragments looked sharp, others uneven, others almost useless. But everyone had the same idea: metal equals strength. Metal is the obvious choice. Metal wins. The girl walked in with them but did not pick anything. She lifted one piece of metal and ran her thumb carefully along the edge. It was chipped, brittle, and even a small amount of pressure could break it. She placed it back. She checked another piece, then another. All of them looked worn out, as if they had been weathered by time and rain. They might work for some tasks, but she knew something felt off. A blade made from such metal would either bend too easily or break at the wrong moment. Other trainees didn't think that far. They were excited, talking loudly about fires, hammering, shaping metal, making sparks fly. Everyone wanted the dramatic experience of forging something. They filled their buckets with scrap metal and hurried outside again. The girl stepped out last. She didn't feel rushed. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She quietly walked toward the lake at the edge of the camp. The water looked still and dark, reflecting the early sky. A few birds chirped nearby. The ground close to the lake was soft, covered in damp leaves and driftwood. While walking along the shore, something caught her eye. Half buried in mud was a long, smooth bone, larger than her hand but light enough to carry. It had an unusual shape, slightly curved, and one end was already worn down into a sort of point. She pulled it out carefully and wiped the mud off. The surface felt strong, almost polished by nature itself. She held the bone up against the light. It wasn't sharp, but it had potential. If shaped correctly, it could become a lightweight but surprisingly durable tool. She remembered stories her grandfather used to tell how ancient people sometimes used bones because they were easier to shape and more flexible than poorly made metal. He always said that tools don't work because of what they're made of. They work because of how they're shaped and how they're used. She smiled a little at the memory and decided to test her idea. Carrying the bone. She walked back to the main field where the others were already hammering metal pieces together. Sparks flew everywhere. The noise of metal hitting metal echoed through the trees. It was loud, chaotic, and exciting for the group. No one paid attention to her as she sat calmly on a flat rock away from the center. She placed the bone on her lap and picked up a smooth stone nearby. With slow, steady movements, she started scraping the bone, shaping the edge little by little. It was quiet work. No sparks, no hammering, no flames. Just the soft sound of stone rubbing against bone and her focused breathing. After a few minutes, one trainee noticed her. He paused his hammering and raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously making your tool out of that?" he asked in a half-amused, half-confused tone. She didn't look up. Yes, why? There's metal everywhere. It's too brittle, she replied. He laughed lightly and went back to his work, shaking his head. To him and most of the group, her choice looked strange, maybe even foolish. Others peeked over too, whispering jokes about her bone blade and wondering how long it would survive. But she didn't mind their comments. She had a habit of trusting her instincts, and today was no different. As the morning passed, she worked with a kind of patience that made time seem slower. She sharpened one edge of the bone, smoothing it evenly. She studied it closely, checking its thickness, its balance, and how comfortably it sat in her hand. The bone seemed stronger than any metal piece the workshop offered. It didn't chip. It didn't crack. It responded exactly how she hoped. By noon, the others were sweating from the heat of their small crafting fires. Their metal pieces had become something close to blades, though many looked uneven or rough. The instructors walked around, observing quietly, offering small tips but mostly letting everyone figure things out on their own. When they approached the girl, one instructor leaned forward slightly, trying to see what she was doing. His eyebrows rose with surprise. "You chose bone," he said, trying not to show too much reaction. "Yes," she said softly. "The metal pieces weren't strong enough." "That's a very unusual choice," he replied. "Not wrong, just unusual." She continued shaping the bone while he watched. Her movements were steady, not rushed. There was something almost artistic about the way she handled the tool, treating it not like a piece of junk but like something with potential. The instructor nodded slowly. "Keep going," he said before moving to the next trainee. The rest of the afternoon went by with the same rhythm. Hammering sounds filled the camp, mixed with occasional laughter and chatter. The girl worked in silence, carving, scraping, smoothing. She used a piece of driftwood to sand the bone's edge finer. Then she used a piece of wet stone to polish it. By the time the sun started lowering and the light turned golden, her tool was taking shape. The bone had transformed into a sleek, pale blade. Not sharp enough to harm anything, but sharp enough to slice plant fibers, trim wood shavings, or help in everyday survival tasks. It looked surprisingly professional, even elegant. Other trainees started noticing the changes too. Their smiles slowly faded into quiet curiosity. Some came closer just to look. They no longer laughed. They just watched, wondering how she had turned something so ordinary into something so refined. One trainee whispered, "I actually think that might work." Another nodded. "It looks better than most of ours." But the girl didn't react to their comments. She was focused only on the final touches. She wrapped a thin strip of cloth around one end to create a handle, tying it carefully so it wouldn't slip. When she finally placed the finished tool on her lap, she looked at it with calm satisfaction. For her, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about trusting her own way, using what she understood, and letting her actions speak for her. As the sun dipped below the trees and the sky turned soft orange, the instructors called everyone together. Tomorrow, they would test the tools in a series of tasks. The girl picked up her bone blade gently and walked toward the group with the same quiet confidence. She had started the day with. No one knew it yet. But the choice she made that morning, the choice everyone doubted, would become the reason the entire camp would be talking about her by the end of the week. The next morning began quietly, with soft sunlight spilling across the field. A cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh leaves and damp earth. The trainees gathered again near the center of the training area, tools in hand, waiting for the instructors to arrive. Some held metal blades that looked sharp but slightly uneven. Others had tools that appeared strong but heavy. The girl stood among them, holding her bone blade gently, almost protectively, as if it were something fragile. Even though it a single quote did. She could feel a different kind of attention around her this time. The trainees still glanced in her direction, but now it wasn't to laugh or question her. It was because they were curious. They had seen her working quietly the day before, shaping something they never would have considered. And somehow, it looked better than half the metal blades made under smoke and sparks. the instructors arrived and greeted everyone. One of them held a clipboard with today's testing schedule. He spoke in a calm voice, explaining that today would be split into 2 parts. First, everyone would test their tools on basic tasks. Nothing dangerous, just simple, everyday survival uses: cutting branches, trimming rope, carving small shapes in wood. After that, the second part would focus on using the tool to create something practical, like a cooking stand or a small wooden hook for hanging supplies. Everything was meant to show how well each person understood their material. The group nodded, though some looked nervous. Even simple tasks could become difficult if a tool wasn't made well. The instructors called the trainees one by one. The first trainee stepped forward, holding a metal blade that looked strong but slightly crooked. He tried cutting through a small branch, and the blade worked, though it took more effort than expected. The instructors nodded politely. Another trainee went next, slicing through rope. His tool cut it cleanly, but when he tried carving into wood, the edge bent slightly. He frowned, trying to hide his frustration. One by one, the group demonstrated their tools. Some performed well, some struggled. Some broke small pieces off the metal edges. But everyone tried their best, and the instructors remained encouraging. When it was her turn, the girl stepped forward quietly, her bone blade resting lightly in her hand. The instructors exchanged a quick look, not in doubt but in curiosity. They had never seen someone choose bone for this exercise, and they weren't sure what to expect. She picked up a rope and pressed the blade gently against it. Using just a bit of pressure, she pulled the blade downward. The rope parted cleanly, leaving neat edges instead of frayed threads. A soft murmur ran through the trainees watching. Next, she lifted a small branch. She didn't try to force the cut. Instead, she angled the bone blade carefully and sliced the thin wood fibers a little at a time, making smooth progress. The branch separated without splintering. The instructors leaned in slightly, paying close attention. Then came the carving task. She took a block of soft wood and began carving small grooves, forming a simple but clean design. The blade didn't slip. It didn't bend. It didn't show signs of dulling. Her hands worked with slow confidence, turning the wood into something almost decorative. When she finished, she placed the blade at her side and stepped back. One of the instructors looked at the other before saying, "That was surprisingly effective." The trainees stared at her tool in silence. They weren't laughing anymore. They were genuinely impressed. The instructor wrote something down on his clipboard, before announcing that the second part of the test would begin soon. The group dispersed to gather materials for building useful items. The girl walked toward a pile of fallen branches and selected a few that were straight and lightweight. She didn't rush. She held each piece, feeling its texture, checking for hidden cracks. When she found the ones she liked, she sat under a shady tree and began shaping them. Her idea was to build a small cooking stand, simple, but something that required clean cuts and balanced joints. She used her bone blade to trim the ends of the wood, smoothing them so they could fit together. She carved small notches where the pieces would intersect. She worked quietly, occasionally brushing away wood shavings from her lap. Meanwhile, around her the other trainees struggled. Their metal tools worked well for some tasks but struggled with finer ones. Some blades bent slightly when trimming thicker branches. Others created rough cuts that made it harder to fit pieces together properly. Every now and then, someone glanced at the girl, watching how her blade moved smoothly without force. Her focus never wavered. She didn't seem interested in competing. She simply enjoyed the process, shaping wood like it was something familiar to her hands. Time passed quickly. By mid-afternoon, she had assembled the cooking stand. It stood neatly on the ground, made of 4 balanced legs with a small frame in the center for placing a pot. The wood was trimmed perfectly, the joints were precise, and the structure looked stable despite its simple design. An instructor walked over to her and stopped, staring at the finished stand. He bent down to check the joints, running his fingers along the smooth edges. "You made this with your bone blade?" he asked in a tone that almost sounded like disbelief. "Yes," she replied quietly. He didn't say anything for a moment. He simply nodded, clearly impressed, and moved on to check the others. Later, when all the trainees finished, The instructors gathered everyone in a circle. The sun was lowering again, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and gold. Everyone stood with their tools and finished projects beside them. One instructor stepped into the center. "Before we announce anything," he said, "we want to say that all of you worked hard today. You used your creativity, you stayed patient, and you learned something new. That's what matters most." The group relaxed slightly. He continued, "But this training also rewards innovation. We want to recognize the person who showed not only skill, but also the ability to see potential where others didn't." The trainees exchanged glances. A few looked confident. A few looked nervous. Then the instructor looked directly at the girl. "Step forward," he said. She walked slowly to the center of the circle, holding her bone blade lightly in her hand. She didn't smile or show excitement. She simply stood there, calm and steady. The instructor lifted her tool gently, holding it for everyone to see. "This is the first time we've seen someone choose a material most people ignore," he said. "And not only did she choose it, but she shaped it better than many shaped their metal. Her blade cut cleanly. It carved smoothly. And the project she completed with it was one of the most precise structures we've seen today." A quiet awe fell over the group. Some trainees nodded in respect. Others looked at her with newfound admiration. The instructor placed the blade on a small wooden table behind him. "This tool," he said, "will stay here as an example for future trainees. Not because it's made from bone, but because it reminds us that creativity often beats the obvious choice." The girl lowered her eyes. Not out of embarrassment, but because she wasn't the type who wanted attention. She simply felt satisfied knowing her work spoke for her. The instructors asked her to share a few words if she wanted to. She hesitated at first. She didn't like long speeches or dramatic moments, but she looked at the group and said something simple. "I just followed what felt right," she said. Sometimes the best idea doesn't look like the best idea at first. Her voice was soft, but everyone heard it clearly. The training session ended soon after. Trainees packed up their things, talking among themselves about how surprising the day had been. Some approached her to ask how she knew bone would work. Others simply complimented her on her skill. She answered politely, but she didn't act like she was special. She knew her success wasn't magic. It was just patience, concentration, and an open mind. As she walked away from the training field, the evening breeze felt warmer than usual. She glanced back once and saw her bone blade resting on the display table, catching the last bit of sunlight. It glowed softly, almost like a small reminder that small choices can lead to big surprises. The day had ended, but the story everyone at the camp would remember had just begun. She came in quietly, chose the path no one else believed in, and left the instructors speechless, not because she was trying to stand out, but because she trusted her own way, and sometimes that's more than enough.